Before I begin, got it. Before I begin, I was going to share that we are recording this meeting today so that you can make it available to your colleagues and contacts that maybe weren't able to make the session live, and we will also post a copy on our website. So welcome this evening to the grant writing workshop for the Isaac Coleman grants. My name is Rachel Nygaard, and I'm joined here from another member of Buncombe County staff, Angeline, if you would wave. Angeline and I both work in strategic partnerships along with our colleague Sarah Joss, and you might interact with any one of the three of us during your grant application or grantee work with Buncombe County through the Isaac Coleman grants. I'm going to share my screen. What I'll be doing is going through a set of prepared slides and giving an overview of the Isaac Coleman grant opportunity. And then at the end, we've got lots of time for questions and discussion. We have up to an hour if we need it. Okay, see that? So our agenda together is to start with a little bit of information just in general about Buncombe County and our strategic plan. And that's where we have the basis for this grant program. Then, like I said, we're going to get into the Isaac Coleman grant process and talk a little bit about tips for successfully navigating that process, and then have time for questions. We start broadly so that we can recommend the website buncombecounty.org, where you can access any of the information that we talk about today. Buncombe County government is a large organization. You see our elected officials on the top of the screen, and we'll come back to them in a second. And then our many different departments as a local government organization. Buncombe County is responsible for lots of different types of health and human services, justice services, recreation and libraries, as well as lots of land use and other community services. We have a general fund budget, for context, of almost $400 million annually. And it's all set by and subject to the governing of our elected Board of Commissioners. That's the group that we'll talk about in a few minutes who voted to form this grant program, and that's the group that approves ultimately the grants that come through this grant program. It's also the group, the Board of Commissioners, that adopted our organizational strategic plan. So we're currently in a plan, Buncombe 2025, that is at the website I told you about earlier, buncombecounty.org. A shortcut to it is /2025. And we mention this because it lays out the strategic plan, or the strategic vision, excuse me, for Buncombe County. The plan itself names community focus areas where we want to see a thriving community in education and vibrant economy, environment, and well-being. And we couldn't accomplish the goals that are in our strategic plan without the partnership of community-based organizations like yours. And so that leads us into work that we're accomplishing through programs like the Isaac Coleman grants. Also mention it to you so that while you're thinking about how does the work of your organization fit with Buncombe County's priorities, you can go into the strategic plan and take a look. Another important place to align is the Racial Equity Action Plan, sometimes nicknamed REAP. This was adopted a little bit more recently, and it was formed as a result of our current strategic plan, which named equity as the foundational area of focus for our organization. Specifically, racial equity is named as a place to start within our overall equity work in this Racial Equity Action Plan. It's also online on the buncombecounty.org website. The shortcut for this one is actually predictably buncombecounty.org/equity. But it names, again, some specific goals and objectives that we look to when refreshing the priorities for the Isaac Coleman grants. So it talks about particularly, I'll call out the last two bullets on the page, which are around quality of life outcomes, around racial equity in economic drivers. And it talks about examples of what we mean by economic drivers: education, business ownership, workforce development. These are the areas where, as outlined in the report, it's hard to find any areas that there aren't pronounced disparities among populations within our community. And these are areas that are connected most to the grant. So that brings us to the Isaac Coleman Fund. This was launched beginning in the 2018 budget year by the Board of County Commissioners, following on the heels of a presentation around the state of Black Asheville. The annual investment that the commissioners put in to this grant is $500,000. We make 3-year awards, so it's $1.5 million approved every 3 years. Here's a nice painting of Isaac Coleman, the person. Some of you who have been around the community for a while might have had the good fortune to know him. He was a local activist and social justice champion, and this fund is named in his honor. He passed in 2016, and there were a couple of great remembrances. Angeline will share a copy of these slides later, and you can click if you're curious to know a little bit more of about the life of Isaac Coleman. You can check out the coverage from Urban News or Citizen Times. His passions were in the areas very similar to what this fund is supporting. That photo looks grainy. That's why, because it was loading. It's actually a video. If you're curious to hear from some of the previous grantees and previous review team members, please visit Buncombe County's website and check out the Isaac Coleman page. The names of each of the committee members are published on our website. I will note that we ask the applicants don't communicate directly with the committee members during the grant making process. But for transparency, we want you to know who helps decide these grants. It's a 7-member group that makes these recommendations. Also on buncombecounty.org/grants, you'll find a copy of the grant guidelines. It's a gray button that looks like that box there. The grant guidelines document is your go-to place for all things grant program. It's sort of the A to Z Isaac Coleman grant information. It includes purpose and funding, eligibility, timeline, the review and the awards. It can be a little bit of a dense document, which is part of why we like to get together in formats like this. So the basics of the grant, these are grants, like I said, to advance racial equity. They're to organizations who are located in Buncombe County with service to Buncombe County. If you're not sure if your organization meets that criteria, feel free to drop us a line. The commissioners, like I said, approve 1.5 million in awards every 3 years. So that's 500,000 annually split between the applicants. Each individual applicant can ask or request up to 150,000. So it's a pretty small portfolio of active grants, 4 or 5 funded projects at any given time. Here's what the committee is looking for in the proposals. This slide and then the next one that talks about strategies give you some keywords to look for. And this is also repeated in the grant guidelines, of course. So economic growth and educational improvement. Those are components that are tied to that economic driver piece I was mentioning earlier. We're looking for projects that expand partnerships. We do want to see communities working together in whatever collaboration makes most sense for each project. We know all projects are different, and different communities are different in what collaboration and partnership looks like. The third bullet mentions self-organization. This is about community-created solutions that help bring people together, tie them to their sense of place, tie them to their culture, and increase that cultural pride and ownership. So you heard me say community-driven. You heard me say education and economic success with equity in mind. Increasing social networks, community trust, and leadership. This isn't for an organization to be doing community charity work. This is for an involved community working on solving and creating solutions to these issues together, with a grounding in racial equity. So we open the grant applications actually in December, and we're glad that you all learned about the funding opportunity, and we continue spreading the word throughout December, January, and then February is when the applications are due. Grant review will occur through the spring, and grant awards are formalized in June. The reason for that is the county commissioners' fiscal cycle. When they adopt their annual budget in June, the grants will be a part of that, and we'll stay in touch with you as we get closer to June so that you'll have specific dates to watch out for. Grants start July 1, and there are 3 fiscal years that are awarded as part of the announcement. And then we do support and partnership and monitoring with the grantees through our office on a year-round basis. Here's a little more about the timeline. Like I said, we'll stay in touch with applicants throughout the process. The committee has discussed, you might notice in the grant guidelines for Isaac Coleman grants, something about finalists. being selected. The committee has discussed that they, depending on how many proposals they get, they'd like to actually meet with and interview applicants. And one way that they might do that is to pick finalists to interview. We don't have dates for that just yet, but when we get that information, our commitment as staff is to pass it along to you all as applicants. And then we can also, as we get closer, have the exact dates of when like the actual budget adoption and everything will occur. So the way to apply is through our online portal. If your organization has applied before, you probably have an account. Even if it wasn't you with your email address that logged in to create it, drop us a line because we can go in on the back end. Thank you. We can go in on the back end and link your account to your organization account. It's a pretty easy system to use if you haven't used it before. The first time you go there, it does require you to enter some basic info in about who you are, and then click one of those verification emails to activate. We're here for tech support if there's anything we can do to help you navigate that. And we have paper copies. If you are working with a group that doesn't have that level of access or comfort with the technology, you can fill it out a different way and we'll help you get it to the committee. The application deadline is not listed on this screen, but I do feel like it's important to name that February 10th. Angeline, is it 5 p.m.? Yes, 5 p.m. on February 10th, regardless of whether you're turning in the online application or the paper application. This slide is not meant for you to be able to read it on a meeting and a Zoom screen, but to show you a snapshot of that there's a scoring tool. It's actually built into that grant guidelines document as the very last page. If you want to zoom in and start looking at the details. But the overall organization is there are 7 questions down the left that get scored. And each question across the top shows that it can get anywhere from 1 up to 5 points. And the description is meant to give information about what it is the committee is seeking. So a model answer or an excellent 5-point answer you can read for each of those 7 items and so forth. So the budget is an area that we've spent some time looking at as a committee and as staff. An example just to show you what kind of information is in this scoring tool. Under budget, under excellent, it says budget is complete with explanatory notes, clear, detailed, realistic, comprehensive, efficient, and clearly aligned with the narrative and project plan. So that's a lot to try and keep track of, a lot of pieces, but we want to give full transparency about what the committee is seeking in their model answer. So breaking down kind of each of those pieces, making sure that you've completely filled out all of your lines about how you plan to use the funds, explain where it's not clear, if like maybe you're saying personnel, but there's a notes box. You might say this is for 1 full-time case manager position, or whatever the note would be that applies to your project, that you've put in a realistic amount that is going to cover your needs, cover your costs, and help you effectively carry out what you told us in the project plan you would plan to do with the grant. So the application questions, there's only 5 showing on the screen right now, so I'm going to click to the next screen and then come back. You'll see there's 7 questions that are scored. Those exactly match the scoring tool. Then there's 2 other questions where you can give additional information for the committee's consideration that don't have a score. The committee will recommend their finalists based on all of this taken together. So lead organization, it's written that way because in many cases, organizations have collaborative partners. So what group or organization is your lead group who's making this application? That's who we would be entering into contract with if the project turns into an award. So you talk a little bit about who's applying. Project plan is your place to describe what you're seeking funds to accomplish. Describe your proposed project or program. We use the word project a lot, but in some groups, program and project are interchangeable. Describe what you're hoping to accomplish and how it relates to equitable opportunity. How you chose this community-driven issue and how community buy-in is demonstrated. There's a question for equity. Here, Buncombe County shares how we define equity, and we want to know how your organization or how your project, employs equity strategies in your work. Because this is a racial equity grant, it feels important to share how we define equity. We know that inequities exist across many different domains, whether it's race, gender, age, sexual orientation, disability status. There are inequities of many types in our community, and racial equity for Buncombe County is a priority. Our leaders chose to lead with race because of how pronounced the disparities are in race. And when you look at the Racial Equity Action Plan, again, you can see the data that we look to for that, whether it's health, life expectancy, education, earnings, housing. Those inequities really do cross lots of areas. For this grant, of course, we talk about jobs and education at the center. And we look for, the ideal state when race can no longer be used to predict outcomes, and outcomes for everyone are improved regardless of their status. There's a question for you to speak about your partnerships. That's number 4, whether they're formal partnerships, informal partnerships. What do partnerships look like? What do networks look like? Who is a part of making this work? Results. Those of you who have been in the grant world are used to this question. Grantors a lot of times want to ask about outcomes or results. This is the question that helps us understand what will be achieved as a result of this funding. So how will you know if you're successful is another way to ask that. And how does it tie again to those priorities of economic and educational improvement? The 6th question is about evaluation. This is here because we encourage groups at the very beginning to be thinking about not just what they hope to achieve, but how they'll know if they achieve it. So how will you ensure that accountability for those proposed results? Are there certain measures, it says quantitative or qualitative, things that you'll track and be able to report so that you can see how your progress is going if you're funded. And finally, budget. We mentioned this a little bit before, but we are looking for a detailed annual budget Angela, is there a sample form?
I believe there is a sample that they can use as a guide, but there's not a template that's required.
Thank you. So we have a template that you can adapt and use that has a revenue section and an expense section, and it's a way to show the different costs by category. And it's also has a way to show other sources of revenue that might be contributing to the project. We don't want to box organizations in. If you have a budget form that already works for you, you can use that. But do keep in mind, if you're replacing or supplying your own budget form, check the scoring criteria and see, okay, would it be clear to somebody that hasn't seen our form before? Is it explanatory? All of those different items. And then finally, I mentioned there's 2 questions that aren't scored: sustainability and then other. Other is actually, Angela, not if this is true, I think it is. Does it have an upload button? You know what I was going to ask. So it has a narrative box, just like all these other questions you can type into, and it also has an upload button. Some organizations have found that they wanted to be able to submit their brochure or something else that there wasn't a place to put into the narrative, and there's now a button that gives you a way to submit additional information. The rest of the questions have a character limited box to type into. So that is a tip that takes me to the next slide. I'll just share that tip that was on the tip of my tongue. Some people prefer not to do their work right in the grant software, but to like just read the grant questions and work on the grant questions. That makes sense. The grant guidelines actually tell you how many characters are available. Angela, and I'm watching you to see if you know what that is.
1,500 characters per question.
1,500 characters. So if you use Google Docs or Microsoft Word and you're crafting your answer, there's actually a tool that can count your characters. It includes spaces. We don't want to constrain you, and we also want to help keep the information concise for the review team, because they do have a lot of reading to do. So that's the reason, trying to kind of find that balance. But do that ahead of time, pay attention, because if you wait until the very last minute to paste them in on the day that it's due, and you find that it cuts off because you did too many characters, that might be putting you in a tough position at the last minute. So keep the scoring criteria in mind. We've given you as much info as we can about what's going to happen after you turn your proposals in to us. So looking at that criteria and imagining putting yourself in the shoes of a reviewer as you craft your information to put in the application is a good strategy. Try to be as clear and concise as you can, meaning the reviewer may be familiar with your organization and maybe not. They may be familiar with the kind of work that you are doing and maybe not. So you just want to kind of speak as if they weren't familiar and explain it clearly. And again, that word concise, not being too wordy, because they do have a lot to read. Be consistent and pay attention to detail. If you mention something in your project plan, making sure you carry that theme through. You mention a staff position that you want to fund in the project plan, but it doesn't show up in the budget. That would be an inconsistency that would create confusion on the reviewer's part. We have a bullet item here around know how to talk about sustainability. We want to acknowledge that nonprofit organizations and community-based work is very heavily reliant on grant funds by its very nature. So it's not a scored question to say, how are you going to sustain this work after the life of the grant? And this isn't forever funding. So thinking about how this funding might mix in and give a boost and leverage and springboard and all of those things, your work. But also be clear about what would, what, be clear about what can happen as a result of the funding. Without this funding, we wouldn't be able to take it to the next level in this way, grow our project or start our project, or serve the number of families, serve the number of kids, that kind of thing. Be relatable. You're human. The grant committee members are human. It's okay to show a little personality, and don't feel like you have to come up with a new special grant language in order to be able to talk about your work. Talk about your work in the same way you would if you were explaining it to someone new that you met who wanted to know all about it. And don't hesitate to ask for help. I don't know if there's a slide about this. There's not, or I don't see it right there. We have these grant consultations. There is a slide about it. Okay. Later, we will show you how you can sign up for time with staff, but you can call us, you can email us, you can use the link and sign up for time on our calendars. Don't hesitate to reach out if you have a question. And staff doesn't participate in scoring, so that helps us be a little bit more neutral. Just so you know what the committee has funded in the past, in this scope, there is 500,000 granted in the last cycle 3 years ago, but close to 2 million requested. So about a 1 in 4 ratio. There were 5 awards that were made, and they ranged from $43,000 at the smallest up to $150,000 at the largest. Here's the grant assistance link. And Angelina, if you want to put that in the chat so it's clickable. We have a whole bunch of time slots on our calendar. Sarah and Angelina and me are all available to talk with you about your ideas or your questions. That's in a one-on-one setting because you might go home after this conversation and think about it and be processing it and come up with a thought, or say like, oh, I was holding off because I really didn't want to mention it in the group. We're available. And for the purposes of being here together, we also wanted to give people a chance to ask questions while we're joined. I'm checking the chat. There wasn't anything that came in through there while I was talking.
I have a couple of questions.
Great. Fire away.
You talked about a sample or a template for that budget. Where would we find that?
Angelina, you looked like you were about to speak.
Yeah, I was pulling it up. It should be in the application portal as you're going through. On the budget question, there'll be a link there to click for the sample.
Okay. And then my other question is, I know that y'all had you had those proposals. Are you able to provide like the successful proposals as like a sample or an example to people applying so they can see like what was successful?
Like a copy of the previously awarded proposal.
Yeah, and then I know there's probably some private information like budget or stuff on there that I don't want any of that. I just want like their narrative or the answers to the questions.
Yeah, let me take that and think about that, Damien. We've been working with a consultant who's been giving us advice about how to be more accessible and inclusive with grants, and they talked about us creating example like best practice applications. And we haven't done that like hypothetical ones, but your idea of just putting out there the actual applications from the last round makes
Yeah.
a lot of sense. It's all public information.
Yeah, I did read through the reports of them, like the ones that are active, but it'd be cool to see the proposal too.
Yeah, we'll follow up with you.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Can I get the can I get the grant assistance info again, the website?
Yes. So it's a Calendly link. Can you see the chat?
Oh, that's the link in the chat.
Mm-hmm. It's a online app for scheduling. And when you click it, it'll give you choices of open, like whenever somebody books one, it drops off the open list. And if that doesn't match your availability, let us know and we'll find other time.
Thank you.
Yeah. And in those sessions, organizations sometimes pitch their project idea and say, does this make sense? Here, this is what I was thinking. Can I ask you, does it, I was thinking about describing it this way or this way. Do you have a preference for one or the other? Again, we're not the committee members and we're not scoring, but we can just kind of brainstorm with you and help you think through ways of structuring it for the committee.
Could you go through a little bit what that 3-year, how that works as far as the awards of the grants?
Yes.
Just to
Yeah.
clarify.
Yeah, sure thing. We only open the Isaac Coleman grants once every 3 years. So the county commissioners will set a budget once a year and they put 500,000 each year into Isaac Coleman. But at the start of the 3-year cycle, the awards for 3 years get made. So in year 2 and in year 3, we're contacting the already awarded groups to make sure everything's still on track with their performance, there are no issues, and they're able to renew. So it's the same funding amount 3 years in a row.
Okay, so your project is to go over the 3 years.
Yep,
Right.
and that's a good point of clarification that I should have mentioned about the budget. Depends on how you organize it. We do want to see an annual budget and how the funds would be used in 1 year. Each year at renewal, we do have an opportunity for funded projects to update their budgets. Of course, that can happen mid-year too if things change. But getting a one year or an annual budget helps us with our first year's award.
Okay, so an annual budget, but a 3-year renewable, basically. Then
That's right. Yep, it would
Okay.
automatically renew.
Okay,
For year
gotcha.
2 and year 3.
Gotcha.
But
Thanks.
that's a little confusing.
Yeah.
Hey, Katie.
Hey, can you talk, and maybe this is in some of the materials on the website, but can you talk about what this funding could go towards in terms of like projects or general operating or positions?
Yeah, county funding is very flexible. So there's very little that it can't support. There's language in there that says it has to be a public purpose. So not for any individual enrichment, it's supporting something that's a public service. And outside of that, there are very few things that we would see in someone's proposed budget that we would find unallowable. I feel like if lobbying were in there or like debt service were in there, there might be a couple of possible line items that we'd need to talk about and negotiate. But generally, nothing ordinarily associated with a project is off limits. So that means it can be salaries. It can be operating expenses from direct things like supplies or materials or equipment or professional services like marketing or organizational strengthening, capacity building. Administrative costs are allowable. So doing business with Buncombe County, some of this is covered in the grant guidelines, requires insurance. We're going to ask for a general liability policy. And if your organization doesn't have the required levels of insurance, when it's time to contract, we'll work with you to try to build that in to your budget. So that could be something you're thinking about at the beginning. There's also financial administration, paying the costs for bookkeeping, helping contribute to the cost of an audit, paying rent, paying just all of those operating costs that a project or an organization can incur. We prefer to see direct expenses rather than indirect. And if you've written a grant budget before, you might remember, you might have seen some organizations will say, like, what's your administrative or indirect amount? And you just put like 10% or something to admin. We'd rather see those admin costs built directly in. So if it's 25% of your director's salary, put that in as a line because they're going to be supervising the project or what have you. That was long-winded. Helpful. Okay. I appreciate these questions because it helps us think about we're always looking for process improvement, how to convey better next year on the front end.
So when I have another question, sorry.
Yeah, feel free.
For the grant amounts, like if your project would be approved, but like the amount is like too much or it wouldn't be approved, like how does that work? Like, is there any reason, I guess, not to request the full 150,000, or like will it be denied on the merit of like, we think that your project doesn't require that much money, or like would you talk to the people that would get approved and be like, can you lower that amount, or like how does that work?
We talk to the committee so they can be ready to think about partial awards. If they want to consider any partial funding awards, to really think through from the very start about how that could impact a project. Sometimes a partial award makes it so a project's not possible. And sometimes a partial award is doable because you could just do a little bit less of the project, have a part-time worker instead of a full-time worker, and it's doable. Maybe you serve less people or whatever, but you can still do it. So we don't know exactly how it will happen. I would assume that those questions might come up in the finalist interviews. If they really like a concept but don't think they can afford it, or if they like more than they can afford to bring in and they want to talk about adjusted amounts, their commitment is to do that in conversation and in collaboration with the applicant, not in a vacuum. Like, not just looking through your budget and saying, well, we'll cut this line and then that gets it to a number we can afford, because they might not know everything about your work that you do.
I guess it would kind of depend on the grant proposal if it looks like it could be reduced. Like if you have a grant proposal for like 3 different communities and they're like, we could do 2, like,
Right.
okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And again, that's that cost effectiveness. The only reason I would think that a big ticket price would be a turnoff is if it doesn't seem like it's cost effective.
Yeah.
150,000 and all they're doing is paying one person. Well, is that a good use of funds?
No.
That was rhetorical.
No, I had my mic unmuted too. I'm sorry. I thought I was muted.
Thank you. Damien, Katie, Demon, Jessica, Norma, Patrick, Amy, calling all the names. What else is on your minds?
So for the 1,500 characters, is that per question?
Yes. Yep. I like working on these in the app itself, in the application software, because it shows your countdown, how many characters you have left. But I also understand I'm an old-fashioned person, and I do save backup copies in Microsoft Word for myself. So whatever format works best for you. Angelin?
So the character count does include spaces and punctuations as well.
Yep. So you can format, like you could hit enter, and have a blank line between your two paragraphs for like nice visual appeal, but it's gonna eat characters as you do that. That's a very technical way to describe it.
And it's
Okay.
okay.
Go ahead.
It's okay if you go over like 50 words or so, or it has to be 1,500.
It's going to stop you. Yeah. And because it's a machine, like it's not flexible on characters and on lateness, it will close itself off on the last day at the appointed time. So even if you've already started kind of working on it, but you just hadn't adjusted the one question that was over characters and it cuts out of time, it won't take it. So ahead of time is good.
Yes.
It's human nature. We're deadline oriented, but try to be a day. Give yourself a little cushion. Go ahead, Angelin.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I would definitely not wait until 4:59 to try to hit submit, because it happens every year where somebody, hit submit at 4:59, but then their internet went out, and so then it was 5:02, and I mean, it, like she said, that the software cuts off at 5 o'clock. So.
Thank you.
Great. Well, we are here. Our goal is to be accessible and responsive. So again, I'm Rachel. Angelin's here. You're not meeting Sarah today, but Sarah is also on our team. And any one of the three of us will do our best to be quickly responsive to you. Our email addresses are in the slides that Angelin will send you. And I'd encourage you to go ahead and sign up for one of those consultation slots if you haven't already. It can be a great time to just check in and gain confidence on your plan. So with that, I'll thank everybody for spending some time with us this evening. Great to see some familiar faces and meet some new folks. And I hope you have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.